live. It is the 3rd of September 2024. The other day I said 2021. 2024. And it is a Tuesday. And I'm reading chapter 5, which is written by Joan Grant. This book is a collaboration with her and Dennis Kelsey. Many lifetimes, describing the way they treat their patients in their different manners. Both are working with hypnosis. We are here in chapter 5, and it is entitled The Cultivation of the Senses by Joan Grant. The medieval taster, who took a mouthful from every dish before it was offered to his master, worked under rather easier conditions. He was always told exactly what ingredients had been used in its preparation, and so, although this was difficult enough if the sauce were highly spiced, he only had to detect the presence of an alien substance. This ability was essential to his profession, for if he had had to wait until symptoms of poisoning developed, his employer would have gone supperless to bed. If a child or even an adult has allowed his taste buds to fall into disuse, these can still be re-educated. Among the children who lived at Treleaden during the war were several who were alleged to suffer from very delicate digestions. In each case, the mother, faced with the dual anxiety of a husband on active service and the responsibility of looking after her own children, because Nanny was now doing war work, had become far too concerned with what they should or should not eat. The complexity of the diet sheets they brought with them was enough to show me that fear, not food, was the cause of their indigestion. Fear that if they did not eat what they were given, they would never grow up to be a man like Daddy. Fear they would be ill if they so much as nibbled some forbidden delicacy. As I never accepted a junior guest except at owner's risk, I tore up the diet sheet as soon as the escort had left and told the new arrival that he was now free to eat as much or as little as he wished of anything which happened to be available. All but two were delighted at this unexpected freedom, and willingly accepted my rider that the new regime would begin the moment they had proved their ability to throw up at will. This useful art came in very handy when a couple of them ingested an enormous quantity of unripe plums, for they were able to get rid of the load at the first twinge of discomfort, instead of making a painful colic, and instead of risking a painful colic. But one little girl was most indignant when she found I had no intention of tempting her to eat. In considerable dismay, she watched me calmly removing her untouched supper tray, and then wailed, "My mummy will be very angry if you don't make me drink my milk." "Your tummy knows better than mummy what it needs," I responded consolingly. I patted her round little stomach and added, "Look how plump and happy it is. You needn't eat for a week if you don't want to, and it won't mind a bit." She was a warm-hearted child, and a few days later thanked me for showing her that meals could be fun. Another child, a boy of 8, was even more outraged when he found that no one took any notice when he sat through a meal without eating a mouthful. He followed me out of the dining room and shouted, "When I starve to death, I hope you get hanged." He kept up his hunger strike for 3 days, and I found it difficult not to show I was worried. The other children comforted me with assurances that he was only being tiresome, and told me that he had boasted that I would soon behave just like his mother and start imploring him to eat. As they despised the ploy of bullying the grown-ups by evoking needless anxiety, They added to his problems by discovering his secret cache of biscuits and removing it. Deprived of a familiar adult target, he then started to bully a smaller child by rubbing axle grease on her head, which reduced her to tears as her hair was curly and would now be very difficult to wash. At this point, Gillian and 2 other teenagers decided to take a hand in the treatment. They took off his clothes, smeared him all over with mouldy jam, and flung him into a nettle bed. Whether being on the other end of the stick was a retribution he had long been seeking, or whether the exercise of extracting himself from the nettles gave him an irresistible strong appetite, I do not know. But he enjoyed an excellent lunch, and thereafter tucked in as enthusiastically as any of the others. The children warmly accepted him after this episode, for he had undergone these reprisals, which were long overdue, without resentment, and had neither whined nor sneaked. He became both affectionate and a great credit to their forthright therapy. The experiment of letting the intake of children be decided solely by their instinct and appetite took place over 20 years ago, and it is encouraging that none of them have since suffered any form of digestive ailments. Even more rewarding is the fact that these children's children, brought up with the same freedom of choice, have shared this benign immunity. Probably because the senses of taste and smell are so closely linked, I have a nose whose efficiency would do credit to a spaniel. Dennis first had evidence of its range when we were walking in a park near our first home in Highgate Village on an evening when the air was heavy with gasoline fumes and London fog. I suddenly stopped sniffing alertly and exclaimed, "Chimonance fragrance. How very odd." He looked bewildered, so I added, "But it is odd to find it in a park and flowering in November." Following the scent along the path and through a sooty shrubbery, I saw 20 feet from the ground and nearly smothered by laurels a single spray of the flowers whose fragrance I had so instantly identified. A nose can not only be a source of pleasure, but can provide useful information. Like most other animals, I can smell fear, which has an entirely specific smell, musky and slightly acrid. This can be a helpful clue when trying to decide whether someone's offbeat behavior is motivated by aggression or only by acute anxiety. A discreet sniff will often tell one more about a patient's progress than will a glance at his temperature chart, and some diseases have a characteristic smell which can be an important aid to diagnosis. An example of the diagnostic angle occurred while I was recording a life as a strolling player in the country now called Italy. I, Joan, was in my London house in the summer of 1938. The woman I used to be, whose name was Carola, was in the stable loft of an inn, a few days' walk from Perugia, in the summer of 1526. Carola was then aged 16 and was nursing a woman called Lucia through smallpox. The identification of the recall was so complete that I became nauseated by the stench of Lucia's disease, and on several occasions had to break off dictation and run to the bathroom to vomit. The description of what it was recording was so painfully detailed that my secretary suffered the same reaction, and she was in the bathroom when the doorbell rang. The stranger on the doorstep identified himself as a doctor who had come to visit a friend who was convalescing with me after an operation. He looked at me skeptically, quizzically, and said, "I suggest you let me have a look at you before I go up to see my patient, for you are extraordinarily pale." Being still more or less on two levels at once, instead of dissembling, I said frankly, "There's nothing the matter with me. I have been reliving a 16th century smallpox, and the smell is so disgusting that I can't get it out of my nose." He accepted my statement calmly, put down his bowler hat and umbrella, and followed me into the drawing room. He then asked me to describe the signs and progress of the disease, which I proceeded to do, with a wealth of unsavory details which I deleted from the published version. When I had finished, he told me that my description of each stage of the disease and its duration had been remarkably accurate, and that the only point on which he could fault me was when I claimed that smallpox had a specific and unforgettable smell. "But it has. I can still smell it," I exclaimed with some heat, to which he replied soothingly, "I am not denying that there would have been an attendant disgusting smells, especially when the patient was being nursed under such primitive conditions, but there is no diagnostic one. I can state this categorically, for I have recently returned from India, where I spent 2 years as the medical officer in charge of the smallpox wards of a large hospital. I did not see him again for 6 weeks. This time he came to show me an article in a medical journal which had come in that morning's post. It described a rare type of smallpox, which had been rampant in Europe during the Middle Ages, but was now almost unknown. A sentence had been underlined in red ink by the doctor. This type of smallpox can easily be distinguished from all other types, for the patient exudes a specific stench, which once smelt can never be confused with any other. Although the smell of disease is instructive, it is unpleasant, but the smell of a healthy body is endearing, especially the smell of a body which one's own finds congenial: adult bodies, children's bodies, animals' bodies, even the body of a baby, providing it is free from an undertone of regurgitated milk. The smell of sweat is in no way repulsive, providing it is fresh, and it soon turns rancid. And it is the smell of yesterday's sweat on clothes which causes the purveyors of deodorants to prosper. The manner in which the majority of people have allowed themselves to be deprived of the pleasure latent in their nostrils is exemplified by the notion that the best they can hope for is to smell of nothing at all. So I stop this here. It's my second reading of this chapter. Have a good Tuesday.